Hello everyone, I've been getting back into watercolour in a big way, so I thought for today's video I would take you through some of my favourite watercolour paints. And all of these paints are Daniel Smith because I do have a big love for the Daniel Smith watercolours, but I do use some other brands as well. So the paints that I'll be taking you through today all have different qualities and they aren't the kind of watercolour paints that you usually find in a typical set that you buy. So these are special colours that I really love to use in my work. So in a basic mixing set, so something like this one here from Van Gogh, you will often get colours like phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, you'll get some kind of lemon yellow, pretty basic colours. And over here you'll have some yellow ochre, burnt sienna, those sorts of things in a basic palette, which is really good to have because these are all great mixing colours. But over here you'll see that I have some Daniel Smith colours and these ones are all a little bit different. So what I'm going to do today is swatch them out. I've already pre-prepared a page in my sketchbook. This is the Handbook Journal Company sketchbook. I've used this one quite a bit. It's the one with that lovely linen cover and it has watercolour paper inside. It's about 21 centimetres by 21 centimetres. That's the measurement of the sketchbook. So whenever I do swatches, I seem to just swatch things down and not worry too much about writing down what I've swatched, and that can be frustrating sometimes, or else the paint is wet and it's difficult to write down the names. So what I've done this time, and I feel very organised, is I've written down all the colours that I'm going to swatch ahead of time. So hopefully I swatch them in the right places. You could also write more details down. So if you wanted to, you could write down what pigments are in the colours. You could write down whether the colour has any kind of texture or granulation in it, whether it's staining or non-staining. All of those details are on the Daniel Smith website. So if you look up any colour, you can find out more about the colour and the properties of the colour. But for today, I'm just going to swatch out the colours and just talk a little bit about why I like using them and how I use them in my art. So some of you that have followed along with my art will be familiar with quite a few of these colours because they pop up all the time, and I went through my tubes and I was really looking for those tubes that are, a bit funky because I use them a lot. And this is one colour. This is buff titanium, and it's a bit unusual in watercolour to have such an opaque white creamy colour, and I find it very useful. In the past I used to use acrylic ink a lot, white acrylic ink, and I'd mix it into my watercolours to create more pastel colours, but now I find that I use this buff titanium quite a lot. So I really like painting circles when I swatch out colours, but you can paint whatever you like when you're swatching. You can do squares or you can do stripes. What I quite often do is paint one in a more opaque version or a more saturated version, I should say, and then I'll paint one that is a little bit more watered down and washy. So you can see that this is a really nice eggshell kind of colour, and I will often mix this colour into other colours to get all sorts of beautiful combinations of creamy pastels. So I'm just going to do a lighter version on the side here. Put a little bit more colour into it. So the next colour is goethite. So this is a brown ochre, and I haven't seen this in any other brands other than Daniel Smith, but it's a really good colour for mixing into blues and greens just to give you those more earthy colours. So if you have something like a phthalo blue or a phthalo green, which is really bright, and you want to knock it back a bit and make it a more natural green, then something like the goethite is really good for that. So I would use it a little bit like a raw sienna or a yellow ochre. But what I love about it is that it does have a really beautiful granulation to it. And you can already see I've just laid that out. You can already see the granulation coming in. So that's a lovely textured appearance of the paint. Just doing a little bit of a lighter version there, so you can see that you can add a bit more water to get a lighter colour. So now I have the Duochrome Autumn Mystery. This colour has a little bit of a metallic shimmer in it. It mixes beautifully with the buff titanium. I often mix the two together, and I'm not sure if this will show up on camera, but this is an example of a painting that has got the beautiful little bits of copper through it. So I'll often add the Duochrome Autumn Mystery into my pinks to give them a little bit of a shimmer. So it's one of my favourite colours. I've been using it for a very long time. And you can get other watercolour paints that are a gold or a silver. I think it's fun to have a couple of shimmery paints in your collection. If you find that it's too much to use it straight, then you can always add it into other colours and it will just give that colour just a hint of that shimmer, which is what I do a lot. So when you paint it out, it's got a really nice sort of peachy tone to it. So the next colour is Transparent Red Oxide, and this is similar to Burnt Sienna. It has a really nice, rich, reddy brown colour to it. And it's another beautiful one for mixing into other colours. So most of the colours here that I've put down at this stage are ones that I use and I mix them into other colours. So if I have a palette like this with your more sort of straight up single pigment colours, a lot of these don't have much granulation in them. They're very strong colours. I might mix these pigments into them to just make them a little bit more muted, but also interesting because it brings in some of that granulation or shimmer that is in these Daniel Smith watercolours. So the Transparent Red Oxide is really vibrant. It's granulating as well. And I used to use the quinacridone Deep Gold a lot in place of this, but I do prefer the Transparent Red Oxide just a little bit more. It's not quite as orange. It's got a little bit more of a red, deeper red colour to it. So the next colour is Naphthalide Maroon, and this is a colour that I used in the Creative Elements Challenge. So if you've watched my past few videos, you would have seen this colour. It's a really, really rich, earthy red. Absolutely beautiful colour. I love it because of just how intense it is. So I'll just swatch it out for you. Bit of earthiness to it as well. And it's another colour that is great for mixing into blues and greens to come up with some interesting neutrals. Because watercolour dries lighter than when you paint it, I really find that I'm drawn to the pigments that are really dark and deep and rich. So this one is one of those pigments that even when it's dry, it just has such a beautiful rich colour to it. So the next one is Rose of Ultramarine, and this is an interesting one because it is a mix of two colours and it splits in an interesting way. So it is a mixture of ultramarine and quinacridone rose, I think is the rose colour. So let's have a look. So you can already see as it starts to dry that the blue pigment is separating out from the rose pigment. So as it dries, that effect will become more obvious. So moving over here, I have Indanthrone Blue. So this is a warm blue. It's one that, again, you don't often get in a palette. You'll tend to get ultramarine blue as your warm blue. But I really like this one. Again, it's really intense. I think this is the same pigment as anthraquinone blue. You can just see how dark and rich that is. And this is my favourite blue. And you can see just how much range you can get with this colour as well, because you can get really light, pretty blues and then really intense, dark blues. It mixes really beautifully with goethite to get some sort of green colours. You can mix it with the transparent red oxide to get some beautiful browns. So it's a really gorgeous blue. So now this is Lunar Blue that I'm going to attempt to get out of this dried out tube just by dipping my brush in. So Lunar Blue really reminds me of storm clouds. It's just a really lovely muted blue-grey colour. But what I particularly love about it is it has intense granulation. So another blue that I really love is Cerulean Blue Chromium. So this is a cooler blue, so you can mix really beautiful turquoise colours. It reminds me more of the ocean. It has a little bit of opacity to it, so it's great if you want to get those more saturated, solid areas of vibrant colour. So you can see that it also has a lot of granulation in it. So you can see with the Daniel Smith colours that I have a strong preference to the granulating colours, and that's because in some of my basic sets or more affordable sets like this one, they don't have much in the way of granulating paints. So I do like to supplement these colours with those granulating colours so I can get some interesting textures into my work. So let's paint the last one out, which is the Cascade Green. This is one of my most used colours and my favourite green. And it's another one of those paints that splits into two different colours. And I'm trying to remember now what the colours are that it has in it. I've forgotten. But you get this beautiful blue that comes through. So blues and yellows. So you can see already some of the beautiful sort of blues and greens that are coming through. So I think I have a bit of a space at the bottom here. So what I might do is just make a few mixes across the bottom here using these colours, just to show you some of the mixes that I often do. So with the buff titanium here, if you mix in just a little bit of the goethite, the naphthamide maroon, And you've got a really pretty muted, slightly pinky mix here. And if we again use a little bit of that buff titanium and we mix it in with some of the Cascade Green, we can get a lovely sort of opaque minty green colour. And if we take our Indian Throne Blue and let's mix it with the transparent red oxide, and we're going to get a gorgeous rich brown chocolatey kind of colour. I'm going to take the Rose of Ultramarine, mix that with a bit of the buff titanium, and might take a bit of the Goethite and mix that in as well. That mixture has created a really nice muted sort of dirty pink. It's a little bit like Potter's Pink, which is another Daniel Smith colour. So you can see how you can use these colours and mix a whole lot of other colours, which is what I do in my paintings. So these are my go-tos, and using these colours I can come up with all sorts of things, and I particularly like quite muted colours, so I often use these earthy pigments and mix them into some of these brighter colours to come up with things like this that you can see at the bottom of the page. So I hope that you've enjoyed learning about some of my favourite Daniel Smith watercolours. As I said throughout this video, I often choose the ones that have granulation in them because when they dry you get all these beautiful textures. I also look out for colours that are very intense so that when they dry they are still really rich and vibrant. So you can see here this Indian Throne Blue, if you use it in a really saturated way you're going to have that really bright pop of colour. I also like using some colours to add shimmer, so the Duochrome Autumn Mystery. When you mix it in, you get a lovely metallic kind of effect in your paint. And the buff titanium is just so handy if you want to create some more opaque colours, that it almost gives your watercolour paints a slightly gouache-like effect. So it creates different kinds of paints, and it's very versatile. So having the buff titanium means that you can have a watercolour set and almost have a gouache set at the same time. So I find that colour incredibly handy to have in my palette. It's one of the colours that I actually go through the most. So I hope that you've enjoyed this selection of colours. Maybe it's given you a few ideas of paints that you could use in your own work. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I hope that you've enjoyed this insight into my favourite Daniel Smith watercolour paints.